Hello, it's me again. Great news. It's time for you to know my deepest, darkest secret. What I'm about to tell you is so disgusting and filthy that it'll destroy this young channel before it even truly begins, and the dislike button will become your new best friend. But maybe wait until the end though. We'll start with the good news. RPGs, and especially CRPGs, are my favorite genre in the entire world. Ultima, Baldur's Gate, Planescape Torment, Arcanum, Pathfinder, KOTOR, Divinity Original Sin, Fallout, and many, many more. I truly love all these games, and have spent thousands of hours in them. But there's a problem, because I never liked the ones made by Obsidian Entertainment.
You need to leave!
That's right. There it is. KOTOR 2, Neverwinter Nights 2, Alpha Protocol, Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, Tyranny, The Outer Worlds, and yes, even Fallout New Vegas. I did not like them.
Not one bit.
I know, I'm an idiot. You hate me, my opinion doesn't matter, unsubscribed, I'm DEI, woke, slop, trash, garbage, etc., etc. But before you get angry with me or leave, you should know that something happened recently that changed everything and made me re-examine my life. To find out what really happened and if I've truly just been an ignorant fool for all of these years, like always, we have to start at the very beginning. And this time, that takes us to Irvine, California, because it was right here in the year 2003 that four And as it turns out, he was right all along, because as Plato predicted, the city of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea and lost forever. But if it wasn't... At the end of the day, when it was all said and done, they were left wondering, was it really, truly all that bad? Sure, millions of people died, but the memory of those brave 15 prostitutes will live on forever. However, Obsidian Entertainment was born. Its founder, Fergus Urquhart, had a clear goal in mind. They were... Alright, I think you get it. Right? At launch, when I played it in 2005, Knights of the Old Republic 2 was a big, giant mess. Bugs, constantly, everywhere, no clip, errors, companions disappearing, and PCs not moving, but also game-breaking ones where the story simply wouldn't advance or a cutscene wouldn't play. Now, I wish it ended there, but this happened to every single one of their games at launch. They made me paranoid, because I kept missing out on content I wanted to play, but that was suddenly mysteriously missing or not working as intended. And that's why I never liked games made by Obsidian Entertainment. Except for the Stick of Truth, I love that game. So as we start this new year, I only have one resolution, and that is to go back to every single one of Obsidian's titles, to give them another shot, and hopefully appreciate them like everybody else seems to do. So I downloaded the content restoration mod on the Steam Workshop, along with a few other enhancements that you can see here, and was fully ready to be proven wrong. Starting up the game, the character creator is pretty simple and straightforward. You get 3 choices: Jedi Consular, which is mostly a Force user, a Sentinel, which is a blend of Force and lightsaber combat, or a Guardian, which mostly focuses on combat. We then get to distribute our attributes, pick a couple of starting skills, and a few feats. You know, typical stuff that's in basically every other RPG. What happened next, however, surprised me a little, because I have to be honest here. For the first couple of hours, KOTOR 2 didn't really convince me. I know the development was rushed, of course, which obviously wasn't Obsidian's fault, and because of that, a lot of content was cut, but the whole intro segment seemed pretty intact and intentional. We wake up on the Peragus mining facility and basically have to figure out who we are, why we're there, and how to get off it. It's a simple premise that usually works, but looking at the same grey hallways for hours at an end wasn't particularly captivating to me. This is also where we meet our first 3 companions. T3M4 shows us the basics of the game until he gets taken out and we run into him again later. But this is also where we find Kreia, right at the start of the game. Now, like I mentioned before, it's been 20 years since I last played Kotor 2, and back then, whole chunks of it were missing, so my memory on the main narrative was kinda foggy. I'm gonna keep this video as spoiler-free as possible, because Kotor 2 is best experienced blind, but I will tell you the basic premise of the first couple of hours. And talking with the mysterious Kreia piqued my interest for the first time. She tells us that we used to be a Jedi who defied the Jedi Council and followed Revan from the first game into war. Because of this, we got exiled from the Jedi Order, which explains why people refer to us as the Exile, but try explaining that to the Sith who are hunting us. After this conversation with Kreia, we receive our first light or dark side points. These basically shift our alignment and makes force powers different and easier or harder to use. At this point, however, it's clear that our first priority must be to get off this abandoned mining facility, so we go looking for our ship. And that's when we run into our second companion, Atton Rand, who's locked up in a force cage for some reason. At first, I didn't really care for Atton, since he initially comes off as a lesser or bland copy of Karth from the first game. We decide to team up, roam the rest of the facility, take a nice little spacewalk outside, find out what happened to the mining crew, and destroy a whole lot of droids along the way. Which brings us to the combat. It's basically lifted straight from Kotor 1, so it's real time with pause, but it does look and feel a little bit slicker than its predecessor. Not only that, but this time around you get to use force powers right from the get-go, which immediately makes the fighting way more engaging. In the grand scheme of things, and compared to today's standards, it's nothing special, but it works well. There's not a whole lot of room for strategy or getting environmental advantages, for example, but it gets the job done, and of course gets greatly expanded upon later in the game where you get more combat feats and upgraded force powers, but more on that in a little bit. We also get to craft our own equipment by making use of the various benches we find around the facility. Again, pretty standard, but back in 2005, or 4 if you played it on the Xbox, this was highly unique and inventive. When we're finally ready to escape the mining facility, we get attacked by the Sith, and one of them looks particularly crispy. Kreia seems to know him and offers to hold him off while we make our escape. In true Star Wars fashion, she gets her hand cut off, which our main character, the Exile, somehow also feels. It signifies that there's a special bond between him and Kreia, which we'll get to explore right after, because as we make our escape on the Ebon Hawk and talk to Kreia, things immediately get way more interesting. As she explained before, we used to be a Jedi who followed Revan and Malak into war, defending the outer rims of the galaxy from the Mandalorian threat. However, this caused a Jedi civil war that left the Order completely devastated and made the Council cut us off from the Force. So this means that we might very well be the Last Jedi, but in a good way, because it actually works here. We then arrive on Telos, where we promptly get arrested and our ship quarantined. This is where we first meet the Exchange, a crime syndicate that'll be a thorn in our side for the rest of the game. We also get to experience the first couple of mini-games the game has to offer, like Pazak, a pretty simple but addictive card game, or new pod races that were lifted from Kotor 1. Later on, we also get to use the turrets on the Ebon Hawk, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. After undertaking a few meaningless tasks and siding with one of the 2 restoration projects, we finally get to leave again. But that's when we find out that somebody stole the Ebon Hawk. We take a shuttle in pursuit, but quickly get shot down. So once again, we crash land, this time on the surface of Telos. And as we wake up, we meet our next companion, Boadur, who seems to know us from the war and calls us General. He seems to think there's a terminal around, which can tell us the location of the Ebon Hawk. So while we're running around this pretty drab-looking wasteland looking for this terminal, it suddenly starts to dawn on me that maybe there's more to this game than I initially gave it credit for. The way the surface of Telos is displayed here kinda irks me at first. It's mostly brown and grey, devoid of life, and kinda depressing, just like the overall story and its characters so far. But maybe that's exactly what makes Kotor 2 so special and unique. This is where the combat picks up and immediately becomes much harder and strategic. While we're taking out mercenaries on the surface who are looking for us, or droids on the inside of the facility we find, it becomes clear that the game has only just begun, and we've not really seen anything yet. This realization only gets confirmed moments later, when we find out that the Ebon Hawk is on the other side of the planet and steal a shuttle to get there, only to once again get blown out of the sky. We find another hidden facility which is run by Atris, one of the former Jedi Council members who we presumed was dead. And this is where I realized I had been wrong about everything that came before. Because this is where Kotor 2 proves what a fantastic role-playing game it truly is. The multitude of dialogue options you get here can go any direction you want. You can confront Atris, get angry with her, scold her, convince her she was wrong, admit that she was right, and have basically a full-blown discussion about what the Force really is, or means to you as a Jedi or a former Jedi. But when you bring up the Sith who are hunting you, the conversation suddenly takes a different tone. Atris knows this new threat needs to be dealt with, and tells you that she isn't the only survivor. So, I guess we're not the last Jedi after all. Each member of the council that cast you out is still out there in hiding, and it's up to you to gather them and bring them to Dantooine, where they'll figure out a way how to deal with the Sith. We have our mission, possible redemption arc, or downright dark side path right ahead of us. And this is basically where the game actually begins. Everything that came before it was just a tutorial. If it had a title drop, it would be right here. Suddenly, the production value also takes it up a notch. Cutscenes are more frequent, there's way more cinematic viewpoints, and everything you do becomes more immersive than what's come before or in the previous game. On the Ebon Hawk, we get the option to fly to 5 different planets in search of the missing Jedi Masters. Which planet comes first is completely up to us, once again showing the brilliant role-playing Kotor 2 has in store for us. Now, I loved Kotor 1, I was dying to see Dantooine again, so that's where I set course first. And this is the exact moment where after 20 long years, Kotor 2 finally fully clicked with me and showed me how brilliant it truly is. Because even though the assets are borrowed from the first game, this is not the Dantooine I remember. It's drab, brown and grey, empty and depressing, like the life has been sucked out of it. NPCs are scarce, and the ones you do meet have lost all hope. So that's when I finally understood it. This is not your typical happy-go-lucky Star Wars narrative with a clear set goal, while heroes and villains battle it out using the full power of the almighty Force, but rather a deconstruction of it. We're in a post-apocalyptic version of the Old Republic, where the general order of things has already been destroyed, and we're just walking among the remnants of it. It's everything The Last Jedi desperately wanted to be, but fell short of. All of a sudden, the grey hallways, the initial lack of plot, and the depressing way the characters act make complete sense to me. It's up to us to restore the Jedi Order and give people hope again, or do the exact opposite and destroy it once and for all. It's one of the most interesting premises I've ever come across in a game, and the way it's executed with the slow burn at the beginning is downright brilliant. It's not just the locations, new and old, or the overall narrative that fortify the fantastic nature of Kotor 2, but the real treasure lies in its writing, its choices and consequences, and its companions. You've played RPGs before, so you know the drill. You meet someone, they initially come off as one way, but then you get to know them, their backstory, you help them fix whatever problem from their past they seem to be dealing with, and now you're friends. Maybe you like them, maybe you don't. Usually it doesn't really matter, because you know what they're like and you know how to get them on your good side. But that's not how it works in Kotor 2. The companions here are actually highly interesting and do have their own complicated personalities, which are not that easy to comprehend, understand, or one-dimensional. You actually have to roleplay in Kotor 2, and not just tell your companions what you think they like to hear, which is how it works in so many other games. In those games, your companions have a set personality, and if you move too far on the alignment bar, they'll love you, get angry with you, or in certain cases fight you or leave. And while this is also an aspect of Kotor 2, what makes it highly different here is that you can actually influence them and shift their own alignment from dark to light or vice versa. And not only does their personality shift, but so does their appearance. This reminded me a lot of the original Fable, but in a much more expansive and immersive way. It doesn't even end there, because your companions can even become Jedi themselves with you training them. They also get their own segments without you even being present. They have their own conversations with each other, reflect on the actions you took and they followed. They talk about how much they agree or disagree with you and actually feel like real people. It's incredible and something I've only ever seen done right in Baldur's Gate 2, my favorite game of all time. There's even whole segments where you get to play as one of your companions while the exile isn't even present. Take Atten for instance. Like I mentioned before, I didn't really click with him at the start, but that's because I didn't know him. The secrets he's carrying with him and the way we can influence him in dealing with those is one of the most interesting arcs I've ever seen in the game. And this goes for every single one of your companions. I'm not gonna go over all of them because again, I don't want to spoil too much, but someone like Mandalore is such a great callback to the first game. You also won't be able to recruit every available companion in one playthrough, because even here, there are choices to be made. Take Mira and Hanrar for instance. They're sworn enemies, so you can only take one of them with you while the other one becomes an obstacle. There's multiple droids who also have their own personalities, and the big reveal on one of them made me laugh like I haven't done in a long time. And even they have their own alignments you can influence. Over the course of the game, Kreia turns into one of the most interesting and best written characters in all of Star Wars. She becomes our mentor and teaches us that the Force is nuanced. There is no clear good or evil, light or dark. Every choice we make has consequences that are unforeseen. For example, on Nar Shaddaa, we meet a beggar who we can choose to give some credits to, which seems to be the right thing or light side thing to do. But then you see what happens to him, and having these credits only makes him a target. He gets robbed and attacked. A lot of games pretend to have morally great choices, but Kotor 2 actually delivers on that fact. That doesn't only go for the main narrative or the companions, but also for the villains in the game. Nothing is as cut and dry as they first appear. Take Visas Mar for example. She's an apprentice to the Sith Lord Darth Nihilus, who gets sent after us after a dramatic cutscene. But when she confronts us and we best her, breaking her lightsaber in the process, she actually aligns herself with us, expanding our roster of companions even more if you choose to do so. The role-playing aspects of KOTOR 2 are far greater than the ones in its predecessor, and the same goes for the combat that initially seems pretty simple, but the main difference is that it takes a very long time for us to actually get a lightsaber. In the first game, you get one relatively early, but here, Atris almost taunts you with yours, which she took when she exiled us from the Jedi Order. So we have to gather the right components to have Bahadur make a new one of our own. It's a process that can take a very long time depending on which planets you tackle first, and again, it also depends if you're playing a light or a dark side character. And because we get our lightsaber at a much later point in the game, loot also plays a very important part, at least in the first half. There's dozens of armor, shields, blades, blasters, and other equipment to be found and upgraded. It's filled to the brim with awesome little details that in the grand scheme of things matter more than you think. For example, even the main menu background changes according to where you are in the game. Now there are still a couple of minor bugs to be found here and there, mostly of the technical kind, but they're not really the game's fault. The restoration mod basically fixes most, if not all, technical issues, and although it doesn't really change the overall story or the part we play in it, it does round out the companions and gives them more dialogue, scenes, and backstory, which they should have never cut from the main game to begin with. Now there is still one negative I have with the game, even after all these years, and that is the ending. No spoilers of course, but it's clear Obsidian or BioWare wanted this to be a trilogy, so the game doesn't end in a completely satisfying way, at least not to me. Don't get me wrong, most of the plots get resolved and there is definitely something to say for a game to have a more open ending like this, but they were clearly hoping they would get to make a sequel, which sadly never happened. So at the end of the day, the question of course is, was I truly wrong about KOTOR 2 and Obsidian Entertainment in general? And, well, yeah, I was completely wrong. It's too early to tell considering Obsidian in general of course, but KOTOR 2 is an absolute role-playing masterpiece. From the morally grey, almost post-apocalyptic story, to its wonderfully written characters and companions, especially Kreia, from the dozens of impactful choices you get to make along the way, to the brilliantly integrated influence system, I thoroughly enjoyed every second I spent in Kotor 2. In hindsight, even those first 4 hours. It's made me extremely excited to go back to the other Obsidian titles I was hopefully just as wrong about. What I'll do for the rest of the year is try and tackle one of them each month, so we've hopefully got a lot of greatness ahead of us. However, that's for later down the road, because right now, we're on the precipice of something incredibly special. Only 3 weeks from now, the sequel to one of my favorite RPGs of all time releases. I'm fully ready to make Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 my entire life for a couple of weeks. Now, ironically, the first game, which released in 2018, was just as broken as Kotor 2 was at launch, but at least the story was finished, and at that point I was kinda used to games releasing in an abysmal state, so I gave it a pass I never gave Kotor 2 back in the day. I persevered through the bugs, played through it multiple times over the years, and absolutely fell in love with it. Now, I realize not everyone has been as lucky as me to play the original and adore it from the get-go, especially if you only played it on console where it's still stuck on 30 FPS. A couple of months ago, I already put out a review of Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 over on Retro Rebound. I'll put the link down below in the description. And it would be a bit too easy to just do the same thing here again. So we're gonna tackle it a little bit differently. For those of you who haven't played the first Kingdom Come Deliverance and don't have time to do so now or simply don't want to, but also for those of you who have played it and need a little refresher on its amazing story and characters, I'll put up a full spoiler story recap next week so that you're completely up to date with all the narrative beats and characters to get you ready to jump straight into the sequel. So until then, have a great time, my friends.